Ladies, gentlemen, and haradrim of all ages, yesterday we had the beginning of the March of the Goblins event for Season 5. This has happened multiple times before in Diablo 4 in different ways, most recently actually just last season. But even last season, with all the itemization changes, this event was just sort of alright. It was a quaint little bonus, but nothing really worth going out of your way for. This time in Season 5? Well, let's just say things are a little bit different. There are at least 3 specific reasons that you might care about this event this time around, because it has been improved massively in its actual functionality. So let's talk about why you would want to do this, and then simply the best ways how. For the why then, Treasure Goblins are dropping an incredible amount of loot on death right now. Sure, a lot of that is rare items, just yellows that you don't really use anymore, but they also drop a good amount of legendaries too. They also drop treasure bags that you can open to create more legendaries, and if you get one of the greater treasure bags, which they have a lower chance of dropping, these are the legendary ones, these are guaranteed to have minimum 1 unique, though I've seen them drop 3 or more on occasion as well per bag. If you are hunting for legendary aspects, if you're hunting for 925 gear to improve your actual loadout, or if you are hunting specific uniques with better rolls than what you have, this will help all of that. The second part though is as a result of that, greater affix gear too, of course, as greater affixes are simply a roll chance on any legendary or unique item that drops, so having something that drops a ton of legendaries and uniques gives you a better chance of having this happen. For example, I recorded the results from an hour of farming specifically for Treasure Goblins in this event, and I got 3 separate full greater affix legendaries, and all 3 of the affixes were greater, and that is incredible. The rolls weren't anything crazy, of course, but that sheer volume in that time frame is insane compared to the rest of my time playing this season. As well, this season's March of the Goblins event, on top of each goblin being incredibly valuable on their own now, is also beefed up the spawn rate of goblins in general, as they tend to do. But not only do they spawn more to begin with than they normally would, but now if you kill one in the open world while this event is active, you get minimum 1 bonus goblin spawn when they die, with occasionally rolling 2 bonus goblins. So every goblin in the open world is actually worth 2 to 3 goblins, which in itself is fantastic and makes the whole thing better just in general. The other main thing that this gives you then is just an absolute pile of boss ladder summon materials. Each goblin tends to drop 2 of these boss ladder summon materials, things like Malignant Hearts, Exquisite Blood, Distilled Fear, Living Steel, and with so many goblins spawning with each goblin, that then really just makes the value skyrocket as far as these materials go. The main reason that this matters, of course, is tormented ladder bosses. Every class in the right build can actively, comfortably farm tier 7 infernal hordes at a minimum, if not tier 8, and tier 7 is when Stygian stones start to be handed out like candy from the material chest at the end of this activity, so a lot of people who want to do torment bosses actually have more Stygian stones than they do regular boss materials, unlike last season, which was much the opposite. That in itself, though, brings up the value of Treasure Goblins a ton from what it was before, as the boss mats that they drop are the ones that we are lacking to do torment. And of course, the main reason to do torment bosses in general is for increased chances of mythic uniques dropped with less time spent per kill. To sort of put that in a simpler way then, Treasure Goblins drop a part of the formula to get mythic uniques, and the part that they drop is the one that most people are lacking at this stage of the season to do more of these kills. So if you want your mythic uniques this season, you should righteously abuse this event the whole time it is here, farm up on materials, and then get your boss killing going. So those are the main reasons why you would want to farm goblins during the event: gear or greater affixes and boss ladder summon materials that lead to mythic uniques. So with that, let's talk about the 3 main ways to farm Treasure Goblins while the event is up. The first, and generally the most reliable, is Helltide. During Helltide, goblins have increased spawn rate to just sort of exist in the open world, especially during this event too, during the week-long event. If you run around a Helltide zone then, you can easily find 4 or 5 different natural Treasure Goblin spawns, and again, in the wild during this event, each of those natural goblin spawns will turn into at least 1 more, if not 2 more goblins after you kill it. So let's call it around 12 goblins per Helltide zone on average per spawn. 2 Helltide zones per Helltide as well, except the one exception that has 3. And of course, these do just respawn again over time, like any enemy, or if you change instances, stuff like that. It's just a chance to happen. So honestly, this is really just reliable as a thing that you can do just over and over for this purpose. The second most reliable method for farming the Treasure Goblins then is actually Nightmare dungeons, specifically ones with the extra shrines affix. These will make more shrines appear in the dungeon, and when you have the greed shrine effect specifically active, you will spawn a Treasure Goblin after killing a certain amount of enemies. This effect lasts for the whole shrine duration, and in most dungeons in a proper speed clearing build, you'll end up with around 4 goblins per greed shrine that you find, though these do not spawn bonus ones on defeat like the goblins will in the open world. The real trick to this though is if you can get a greed shrine that is also cursed with the unending enemy spawn event. and then it just fuels itself all standing on the same spot without moving. Because the one awkward part of greed shrine goblin farming is when the goblins spawn, it will always be behind you, so stopping to kill them slows down your killing spree, which means that you will spawn less goblins, and that's what makes cursed shrines so good for this, because you just don't have to move. The goblins will all spawn right on top of you, so that it just will just sort of happen naturally and fuel itself. That said, you aren't guaranteed to have a greed shrine in a dungeon, even one with the extra shrines affix on it, and cursed shrines are actually not that common once you get into the numbers of it. I ran about 15 nightmare dungeons testing to see how good it was for goblin farm during this event, all of them with the extra shrines affix. Only about 5 of these though had a greed shrine to begin with, though some had multiple greed shrines to sort of even that out. And I only had 2 cursed shrines the entire time across all 15 dungeons, even though each of the 15 dungeons had 4 or more shrines due to the affix. And I'm not saying 2 greed cursed shrines, I'm saying 2 cursed shrines in general. None of them were greed. That said, an important note here as well is that any nightmare dungeon sigils that drop from a treasure goblin, which does happen pretty often right now, will always have the extra shrines affix on it, so you can actually hunt for good dungeons with that by, well, killing treasure goblins anyways. And anything with spiders in it as a dungeon, pretty much just as a base, is a must do for this, as again the spawning of treasure goblins through greed shrines is based on the amount of kills that you get while it's active. The spider based dungeons have tons of tiny little free guys along the way for bonus kills and thus bonus treasure goblin spawns, which means that it goes from an average of like 4 per greed shrine in these dungeons to more like 6 or 7. In general, nightmare dungeons are still really good farm for treasure goblins if you have the right affix on them, the extra shrines, and if you get lucky on the runs and get greed shrines consistently, or even a cursed greed shrine, it's actually worth more than just running Helltide for this. But it's also far more RNG dependent than Helltide is to get to that point, so I would call it a little bit less consistent. I would say it's the second priority farm. Then the least reliable method, but is also the most consistent. Somehow that may sound a little bit backwards, but that's because you have no control over how often you get to do it. It's not really a farm, specifically. It's the Avarice world boss, who is basically a giant treasure goblin himself. When he is staggered and at the end of his fight during this week-long event specifically, he will spawn a ton of these treasure goblins, like a whole load of them, just like a whole screen full of legendaries by the end of it. No idea what to even do with it all at that point. So basically, to sum it up, the best way to farm treasure goblins consistently is Helltide. If the goblins from Helltide drop a good dungeon with extra shrines like something full of spiders, you should absolutely do that once your goblin spawns dry up in Helltide. If the Avarice world boss is spawning, do not miss it, and that's pretty much it. That does it for today then, everyone. Just a sort of PSA that the March of the Goblins event this time around is actually way better than it has ever been, and if you're still trying to improve and perfect your build, this is a really lucrative activity to take part in while the event is around. I hope you've enjoyed this end, and hopefully you enjoy your time with our little goblin buddies while it lasts. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.